Welcome to Vigorous Fasting. I'm Coach Steve. Let's talk about the 12 days of fasting that I did the last 2 weeks. But full disclosure, full disclaimer. I didn't fast for 12 days consecutively. I fasted for 6.5 days, followed by a nice refeed and a cheat meal on Sunday. And then I did another 5.5 days of fasting the week after. So over the course of 2 weeks, I ate for 1 day, fasted for 12 days. I did my blood work before, during, and after. And I also took progress pictures before, during, and after. So you can see the difference in my before, during, and after progress pictures regarding fat loss, muscle fullness. You can see how much muscle I lost, if any. And we'll go over the blood work results a little bit later in this video. So let's go over why I do fasting. The main reason why I do it is just because you're constantly stimulating mTOR when you're doing bodybuilding. You stimulate that with hypertrophy training by, frequent protein intake and high protein intake. And then, whether you're drug-free or enhanced, when you're enhanced, you're definitely stimulating mTOR with, the performance-enhancing drugs that you're taking, whether that's peptides, growth hormone, insulin, anabolic steroids, some of the SARMs, you're constantly stimulating mTOR, which means that over time, because you're constantly shuttling nutrients into the muscle cell, right, to stimulate mTOR and protein synthesis, you might prevent some of the toxins, the metabolic waste products, and the detoxification of your body overall, because stuff is constantly being shuttled in, but some of the products are not being taken away. So what you do, or what I do, to keep mTOR low, and to increase the detoxification of all these metabolic waste products or some of the metabolites from the PEDs that you're taking, you don't eat and you don't train for a week. So let's say you have a training block of 6 to 8 weeks and you reach a semi or completely overtrained state by the end of it. You're late on recovery, right? You're late on protein synthesis. Your CPK is going to be elevated, at least in my case. Your creatine phosphate kinase is elevated because you've been training so hard, so heavily, and it's been slowly increasing during the time that you were training your ass off. So you want to take all that out of your blood and excrete that and increase the detoxification. So you schedule a fast while you're deloading. So now you don't train for a week and you don't eat for 5.5 days or 6.5 days or maybe even longer if you can stomach it or keep your appetite under control. Let's put it that way. So, most of you are not going to start with a week of fast. I did 5.5 days worth of fasting. So the last meal you have is Sunday evening, and then the first meal you have again is Saturday morning. So there's basically 5.5 days in between. During these 5.5 days, maybe after the second day or third day, you reach a ketogenic state. Luckily for me, I'm always in ketosis, or previously, I was always in ketosis. So when I start a ketogenic diet, and you have a Sunday refeed or cheat meal, okay, Sunday, you're not in ketosis because you're storing glycogen from the carbohydrate sources in the cheat meals you're having. You'll have to burn that, at least the liver glycogen off Sunday, during the night. And then Monday, maybe perhaps Monday afternoon, you're already in ketosis because you're so fat adapted that the entire process is sped up. But if you're not in ketosis, it might take 3 days before you've depleted liver glycogen and glycogen stores in the muscles sufficiently enough to get into a ketogenic state. So if you're not in a ketogenic state, the first 2 or 3 days of fasting might be pretty tough. If you're already in a ketogenic state, by Monday afternoon, you're in ketosis. And then, the ketogenic state slowly increases over time as your fasting, continues and you release more and more body fat for more and more ketones. Now, of course, during this time, you stay as hydrated as possible because, you do produce a significant amount of ketones, and it's not like you're reaching a state of ketone acidosis, but you do want to keep sufficiently hydrated just to make sure that everything optimizes, because the detoxification process is a large portion of that is going through your kidneys. And the more water you take and keeping your electrolyte intake consistent and reasonably high allows for more detoxification of these metabolic waste products or toxins or metabolites or whatever you've been taking and doing, in the weeks leading up to this fast. So by keeping your water intake high and your sodium intake high, you allow for the most amount of detoxification while you're fasting. The downside of the high sodium intake is that some of the bile acids, they get excreted, right, into the intestinal tract, and then, some of them get reabsorbed, but most of it should get excreted through the stool a couple hours later or the next day. When your sodium intake is very, very high, it keeps a decent amount of water in the intestinal tract, which unfortunately leads to micropoops, which are mostly sodium, water, and bile acids. So this is something you're going to have to deal with. I prefer to take a fiber supplement at least twice a day, because then you give these bile acids something to bind to. And of course, the fiber prevents the reabsorption of these bile acids, which contain cholesterol, liver enzymes, metabolic waste products, metabolites, toxins, etc. So by keeping your fiber intake high, maybe 10 grams or 15 grams 2, 3, 4 times, maybe even 5 times per day. Again, you'll have to figure out what the best way is for you. I do 15 grams of psyllium husk twice a day, and that gives me 2 consistent bathroom experiences, even though my sodium intake is still reasonably high, because the psyllium husk kind of drags out all the bile acids filled with toxins, but gives the stool a little bit of volume, preventing, these micro poops of basically sodium and bile acid that you would have otherwise. So, that out of the way. Guys, if you are interested in this fasting protocol, I got a whole article in the Facebook group, which is pages upon pages of things you could incorporate, why you should incorporate them, and things you shouldn't incorporate. So we're not going to go everything in this YouTube video, because, well, for those of you guys that are really, really interested in trying this, the amount of money that you save by excluding the food will easily get you a month, maybe even 3 months of membership to the Facebook group. So it's very cost effective. By taking food out, you get membership to the private Facebook group, and you have information which will last you a lifetime if you have the balls and the perseverance to last through a 4-day, 5-day, maybe even 6-day fast. So that out of the way. As you're fasting, your micronutrient intake should stay high. You can base that on the daily recommended intakes. I keep mine a little bit higher. I try to match that as close to the micronutrient intake I have while I'm just eating normal food and supplementing certain micronutrients on top. I make sure my fiber intake stays consistent, at least 40 grams, per day, and whether that comes from psyllium husk or another fiber supplement. Acacia gum or an inulin fiber. Usually make a blend of everything. And that helps to keep the stool regular. And then my electrolyte intake is stable on top, because, again, when you're reaching ketosis, you're losing a lot of glycogen, or you already lost a lot of glycogen, which means you're losing also a lot of muscle volume. And you're not holding as much water as you normally would when you have saturated glycogen stores, what I have now. Now I'm full with glycogen because I just started a carbohydrate diet. So you keep your sodium intake relatively high, same as your water intake. This allows for the detoxification of whatever toxins you've built up, which are now slowly getting released because you're no longer stimulating mTOR with protein, training, and performance-enhancing drugs. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you guys. I didn't take my performance-enhancing drugs out during this fast because I'm on 250 milligrams of test per week and 200 milligrams of Primo on top with DJ and pregnenolone and growth hormone. That's basically my super hormone replacement therapy dose. It's not really a hormone replacement, but it's not really a cycle either. So that's just my optimum dose that I, continue for months on end in a caloric surplus. But at one point I need to deload and fast, and I just keep taking the hormones because those are sufficient to maintain my muscle mass and size. So I'm still stimulating a little bit of mTOR. But after I've recovered from the training, mTOR goes down. I'm no longer eating protein, mTOR goes down, but I'm still taking anabolic steroids and growth hormone. Now, I'm pulsing my growth hormone several times per day in basically micro dosages to promote a little bit of lipolysis. And then I add, like clenbuterol, yohimbine, vitamin B5, reasonably high dosages on top, just to optimize the fat burning process. And again, you can find all these details in the private Facebook group, because whatever I do with my body might not be suitable for your body, or you might not want to take these performance-enhancing drugs because you're drug-free. So again, there's no need to go into dosages. What I do is my responsibility. And if you want to figure out what might be applicable for you, you can read everything in the private Facebook group in the fasting article for fat loss and improved blood work. So, first week I took a decent amount of fat burners, so that's growth hormone, clenbuterol, yohimbine, vitamin B5 in the gram dosages, not the 100 milligram dosages you would normally get from a B100 complex, multivitamin. But I didn't train. I didn't do any cardio. Yeah, I didn't do any activity because I wanted to deload. I wanted to let my body rest and catch up on a little bit of work, client work. So the first week I did it with fat burners, and the second week I didn't use any fat burners to see what the difference would be in fat loss. I'll put the before, during, and after pictures on the screen shortly. So let's go over the differences first. The first 6.5 days of fasting I used fat burners, and the second 5.5 days of fasting I didn't use any fat burners. Plus, I used a beta blocker to lower my heart rate, because you got to remember that clenbuterol stimulates the beta-2 receptors of the heart, and a beta blocker prevents the stimulation, so now you keep your blood pressure and your heart rate lower. So I wanted to see if there was any difference in fat loss and the reduction of CPK, creatine phosphate kinase, which is produced in the heart as well as skeletal muscle. But when you're not training, CPK is going to go down significantly. But when you stimulate your heart rate with clenbuterol, your CPK might not go down as much as it could be, because your heart rate is still elevated by the use of clenbuterol and yohimbine, right? Because they have a little bit of synergistic effect. Now, in the second week, I did a little bit of cardio just to get back into the groove of training. So I trained with similar or comparable working weights, just half the reps, because I don't want to train to failure, because there's no protein in my system to facilitate the recovery. So let's say I would do a 50 kilo dumbbell press times 8 reps normally, that's my working weight. Now I only did 4 reps, just half the weight, and the 5th and 6th and 7th rep, or 8th rep, which would normally take you close to failure and create some sort of hypertrophy stimulus. Now I didn't do it. I just touched the weight 4 reps and put it back down, which is enough to, warrant some sort of metabolic response. But you definitely don't create any hypertrophy stimulation. And if you do a little bit, okay, that's where the autophagy comes in. So when the autophagy happens, right, the recycling of old and aged cells, you send this a signal for apoptosis, meaning that the cell eats itself. That's basically what happens when food degrades or people die. That's apoptosis. The cell catabolizes itself from the inside out, and then it slowly falls apart, spilling the content of itself into the surrounding. With humans or food, usually some mold tends to grow on top, so it's not a very pleasing look. But when you create autophagy inside your body, and the 8 cells catabolize themselves or break apart and spill their content in the surrounding tissue, these amino acids, these micronutrients, micronutrients basically, the magnesium and the phosphorus and the sodium and the vitamins which are contained within the 8 cell, they all get recycled. So now you have old cells which get recycled, but because you had a training stimulus in an overtrained state, which continues protein synthesis for several days to come, and during that time mTOR slowly comes down, right? So let's say you're overtrained state, you might have protein synthesis increases or demand for protein for another 3 to 5 days, which is the time that you're fasting, and all the autophagy that happens on the aged and old cells, whatever protein gets recycled, gets destroyed in the autophagy process, gets recycled into the muscle tissue. And this is one of the reasons why I never really lose strength or size, because whatever gets recycled into the muscle tissue is enough to keep the muscle tissue metabolically active, full, hard, dense, etc. So over the course of this 5 days, 6.5 days fast, you're just basically taking all the old and aged cells away, and you're recycling all these molecules or amino acids, micronutrients, fatty acids into cells which were short on recovery or late on recovery. Now, in the second week, that doesn't happen because, when you're already deloaded and you already catch up on recovery, you don't recycle these aged cells into muscle tissue because, first of all, most of the aged cell has already been gone through the autophagy process. So most of them are already gone, and you'll see that in the blood work later. So most of the old cells have already gone through the autophagy process and no longer, there's not much recycling in the second week. But because you're also recovered, whatever recycling does occur needs to get a little bit of stimulation from training to increase your protein synthesis to sufficient amounts to whatever cell still gets or go through the autophagy process, whatever of the amino acids and micronutrients and fatty acids get released in that process, you can now utilize into the muscle tissue that you sufficiently stimulated, basically with 50% intensity. Yeah? So that's the reason why I did the 50% training intensity in the second week and did a little bit of cardio, maybe 10-minute walks, twice a day, one time a day, just to get a little bit of blood flow going. And again, when you're using fat burners compared to not using fat burners, you need to increase the activity output to get the same amount of fat burning effect, right? Because, you get the free fat burning from the fat burners, but when you don't take them and you're trying to reduce your heart rate with a beta blocker, you need to do some activity to still get the fat loss. So let's just go over the picture so it comes a little bit more clear what the differences between both strategies are. In the first picture, before I started fasting, I was 109 kilos. The Sunday before I did the refeed after 6.5 days of fasting, I was 103.9 kilos. So from depleted states on Sunday, I lost about 5 kilos, 5.1 kilograms of scale weight, which mostly comes from glycogen stores, intestinal mass, subcutaneous water retention, a little bit of ego and a little bit of aggression also goes away because when you fast that long, you feel pretty freaking drained. So I did a refeed. I had a cheat meal on Sunday because, I did my blood work before and after. And I decided, good job, Steve. 6.5 days of fasting. You broke a new record. I'm sure your blood work is good. Now we're going to go back to the off season. Then I did my blood work and I reviewed the first week of fasting. And I decided, let's change up the strategy and do another 5.5 days of fasting. So after 5.5 days of fasting on Saturday morning, I went down to 102.9 kilos. So from a depleted state the week before, 102.3 kilos. So from the week before, 103.9 down to 102.3, that's only 1.6 kilograms over the course of 5.5 days worth of fasting. So I lost a significant amount less scale weight, but when you look at the before and after pictures, it looks like I lost more body fat. But it could also be because in the first week, I still had, some creatine left over from the pre-workout that I was taking. So that takes a little bit longer to go away, right? The subcutaneous water weight from the creatine supplementation. Usually we stop creatine 2 weeks before a contest because it takes about 2 weeks for the subcutaneous water retention from creatine to go away. So that has something to do with it. Yeah. It also has something to do with that I did train in the second week, stimulating a little bit of mTOR, right? And protein synthesis and retaining muscular fullness compared to the full week when I was coming from an overtrained state down to basically zero activity and zero eating. So during that time, you get a little bit flat, causing you to retain more water in the subcutaneous space because you'll hold some sort of water retention anyway, whether you're flat, not training, glycogen stored, etc. Depending on what you do with your body is influences where this water is going to be. So if you don't train and don't eat, most of this water that you're going to hold anyway is going to be in the subcutaneous space. Whereas when you compare that to training, at moderate intensity, and without the use of fat burners, for example, you'll hold a little bit more of that water in the muscle cell, causing you to look a little bit fuller and rounder, and less of this muscle is in the subcutaneous space, meaning you have less water retention and thus more definition. So in the front double bicep, it's pretty obvious to see that I got a lot leaner in the legs. Now, some of this is body fat, and some of this is, of course, subcutaneous water retention. And you can also see that with the vacuum. Maybe it's not that clear in these pictures. You got to remember that I took these pictures with my mobile phone, because the first round of progress pictures I took with my Samsung S10, I definitely need to take progress pictures next time with the Sony camera, because it's, of course, going to be way more detailed and, way more noticeable, the progress and the differences that you make while fasting for a week or maybe even 2 weeks. So my apologies that we're looking at the phone camera pictures. I just realized after the first round of progress pictures that I was going to have to take it, keep it consistent, and this is the only way to do it. So before, a little bit watery, vacuum, not that intense. Second picture, vacuum, more intense, quads and arms a little bit more detailed. And then the third progress pictures, you can definitely see I lost a lot of fat and water retention off my quads and arms. And the vacuum is even a little bit more deeper. I think you see the most amount of changes in the back double bicep. Now that's also because on the first 2 pictures, I wasn't really posing correctly. During the off season or the last couple of months, I haven't really practiced my posing. So when I looked at the pictures and I realized my posing was off, I started practicing a little bit more. And then in the last picture after the second round of fasting, my posing is way better. So that's why you see a little bit more detail in my back. And, but the main difference is here in the lower back. Whereas on the picture on the left, you see that my lower back is a little bit soggy, a little bit watery and chunky. And on the right, after, 2 rounds of fasting, my lower back is about half the size. You can actually see some detail in my rhomboids. Now, that's some of the posing and a decent amount of water and fat that came off my lower back and mixed section. My arms look a little bit more detailed, although they're a little bit flatter, obviously. And, you can see a little bit more detail in my hamstrings and my calves. Still, it's nothing astronomical because, not on that many androgens, and my body fat is still reasonably high. And let's go over the last picture. So that's abs and thighs. Before and after, it's very clear in this shot. I got more details in my abs, quads, arms, chest, lats are a little bit more pronounced. And the vacuum is a lot deeper. So that's for the progress pictures. I mean, I'm sure you can see the significant improvement in body fat and subcutaneous water levels. Of course, when you break your fast, you gain a decent amount of water weight back. So from 102.2 kilos, I gained already 5 kilos of, glycogen stores, intestinal mass, and subcutaneous water retention. Because today, after a couple of days on carbs and a refeed, I'm 107.5. So, the weight will fluctuate a significant amount, but when you compare that, so now I'm completely glycogen loaded, right? After a couple of days of a decent amount of carbs. I was 109 kilos before I started fasting, and now I'm 107.5 with more glycogen stores. So 109 kilos after a ketogenic diet for a whole week. And before that, I was on a ketogenic diet, but I did a refeed on Sunday. So after 6 days of no carbs in a ketogenic diet, I was 109 kilos. And now after a couple days of carbohydrates, after 2 rounds of fasting, I'm 107.5. Now I'm sure I'll gain more weight as we go along because, again, it's only been like 2 servings of creatine, a couple days on insulin, a couple days on growth hormone, the androgenic steroids are still the same. But as you go along, you'll still climb and gain a little bit of size back. So hopefully I'll end up at 110 kilos at one point, with more muscle mass and more size. I did 2 workouts, by the way, to bring it back to the training. I did 2 real workouts, so Monday and Tuesday. Today is Wednesday. I didn't lose any strength on chest day, so I still did the same amount of weights for the same amount of reps, and it's the same on leg day. So over the 2 weeks that I didn't really train, even though the second week I did train, but it was 50% intensity. During those 2 weeks that I didn't train at maximum capacity, I didn't lose any strength. And guys, I know you guys are super scared. You see the before and after pictures, but did I lose any muscle mass? No. No, I didn't lose any muscle mass. And what I did lose is muscle fullness, obviously. But I didn't lose any muscle mass. And I clearly didn't lose any strength. I did lose a little bit of stamina while training. So I noticed, let's say, I do that Smith machine, reverse banded Smith machine, floor presses. I'm sure you guys have seen it on YouTube. Yeah, it's not 3 plates exactly. It's maybe 2.5 plates because you're using a reverse band. So it's 2 plates, 2.5 plates, depending on where the bar is being assisted with the reverse band. So I got 6 reps before I started fasting and I got 6 reps after I fasted for 2 weeks. And on the leg press, also reverse banded, I got 10 plates for 6 reps, reverse banded, before I started fasting, and I got 10 plates after I started fasting. But the only difference is, before I started fasting, I had 5 reps on both exercises. I got 5 reps. I needed to take a little break, a little mental reset, and then I got my 6th rep in. And this time I got 4 continuous rep, a little break, a 5th rep, and then a little break, a 6th rep. So the only thing that really changed is this little break between the 4th and 5th rep. I still moved the same amount of weight, even though this took a little bit longer and I needed to take a little bit of a breather in between. Take away from that what you will. I did notice that later in the workout, I was a little bit more depleted, but especially after chest day, I did a 1-day refeed on Sunday and a couple cheat meals and a snack. You only get 1 day of glycogen stores for 1 day. And then I trained on Monday morning chest. So, what do you expect? It's already better on the leg day. And I'm sure when I train arms tomorrow, arms and shoulders, it's going to be even better. And I don't expect to lose, or just expect to progress from this point on and just keep growing and growing and getting stronger and stronger and stronger, especially on this new diet with a decent amount of carbohydrates. So, with that out of the way about strength and muscle mass potentially lost, which I don't think is the case, let's go over the blood work. Now, I'm not going to give you the full blood work results because it's a lot of information and it's a little bit easier to read that in the private Facebook group. So we'll just go over the percentages and see what increased and see what reduced. Let's go with the complete blood count first. Before I did the fast, I noticed a little bit of cold coming up, not corona. Don't worry. Just a little bit of a common cold, a little bit of a sniff, a little bit of a, a little bit of a snotty, and a little bit of irritation in the throat. So, when I went for blood work, my white blood cell count was a little bit low, and my eosinophils were a little bit high, indicating some sort of infection or, irritation of soft tissue. Yeah, it's not from injections because I use pharmaceutical grade. Give it a rest. So, over the course of 2 weeks, my white blood cells increased with 5.5% the first week and then 15.1% the second week, indicating that fasting increases white blood cell count if it's low. So mine were a little bit low because I was fighting some sort of an infection. And then over the course of 2 weeks, whether that's returning white blood cells to baseline because my infection has been dealt with, or because fasting actually increases blood work. But I've seen that on previous blood work where I went in there without any sort of, changes in your white blood cell differential. And then my white blood cells increased also. So first week they increased by 5.1%. And then second week they increased with 15.1%. On the opposite of that, hematocrit went from 84% to 46% in the first week. Yeah, so we'll go over the real results of the hematocrit. 84% to 46%, which is a reduction of the aged red blood cells, which then gets recycled through autophagy. Now, my red blood cell count also went down with about 4.1% the first week and then 0.4% the second week. Now, hematocrit didn't change the second week, so that indicates that autophagy, the most amount of autophagy, at least on the red blood cells and the hematocrit, only happens in the first week of fasting, but not in the second week, because the most amount of red blood cells are already recycled, and the second week of fasting is not going to improve the recycling of aged red blood cells. That already happens in the first week. So first week it went down with 4.1% and then 0.4% in the second week. And hematocrit stayed the same. So it went from 84% to 46% and then stayed at 46%. At all blood works, my hydration was on point. Yeah, I drank 2 liters of water before I went for the blood work results. My urinalysis showed a low specific gravity at the bottom of the range. So that indicates a sufficient state of hydration, which doesn't impact your blood levels, your blood work markers, because dehydration, of course, can increase certain markers. And that's not very consistent if you go into blood work results or you go in for blood work. One time you're hydrated, the second time you're dehydrated, and the third time you're moderately hydrated. I was sufficiently hydrated at all 3 blood works, before, during, and after. Now, when red blood cell count goes down, what has to go up? 3, 2, 1. Hemoglobin. Exactly. Because hemoglobin is contained within the red blood cells. And as red blood cells get destroyed through fasting, your hemoglobin goes up. Now, again, it only happened in the first week. So in the first week, my hemoglobin increased by 3.6%. And then the second week, it reduced again to 4%, almost ending up at the same amount of hemoglobin as the start of the first fast, just returning to baseline. So it went up and down, and ending up at the same baseline level. So that indicates that autophagy again happened in the first week on the red blood cells, increasing hemoglobin levels. I did check my bilirubin levels on the second blood work, just because I was expecting red blood cell reduction, hemoglobin increases, and maybe that would increase my bilirubin levels as well, because, for those of you guys who are, into health and understand where bilirubin comes from, if you don't, let me sum it up for you. Hemoglobin from red blood cells gets metabolized in the liver, and bilirubin is a byproduct of this metabolization of hemoglobin. Another byproduct is increased serum iron and ferritin levels, which we'll get into later. My total and direct bilirubin were still in range. So there's no abnormal destruction of red blood cell count. There's no abnormal increases of hemoglobin resulting in abnormal increases of bilirubin. It's a mouthful, right? Okay. So, as a result of the increases in hemoglobin, even though bilirubin levels were still in range, serum iron and ferritin went up. Now, I only checked serum iron and ferritin the first 2 blood work, so I checked it before and after the first 6.5 days of fasting, because I know that it didn't increase that significantly. Now, there's nothing really significant going on with my platelets. The first round of fasting, it reduced with 4.6%, and the second round of fasting, it increased with 11.3%. Could be because I hit my arm and my pinky on the plinth, what is it called, the board. So every time you get a little scratch, your platelets go up. just because what happens is you get a little scratch. I got hair on one of my toes. I'm not that flexible. So you get a little scratch, platelets go to that area to close the wound, which means your platelets go down, and then, as a result, they go up again. Now, platelets compared to red blood cell count, they have a very short active life. So the active life of platelets is only 8 to 9 days, which means they can go up and down reasonably fast over the course of a week. But red blood cells, they go down over the course of 60 to 90 days because that's their active life. So red blood cells are active for way longer, and your platelets only have an active life of 8 to 9 days. So, those changes can go a little bit more rapidly compared to red blood cells or white blood cells. White blood cells can go up pretty fast too, but it usually indicates a big issue. Again, we already went over that in an infection scenario. So vitamin K and vitamin E intake has been stable throughout both rounds of fasting, so I don't think that impacts platelet count or clotting factor. Again, vitamin K is used in promotion of or contributes to clotting factor. And of course, vitamin E and fish oil both thin the blood, essentially. Kidney function. Let's go over kidney function. Creatinine levels in both times decreased with about 4 to 5%. Now, I don't expect severe increases or decreases in creatinine levels because, again, they're just dependent on the amount of muscle that you carry. So when you have very high amounts of muscle mass, you produce more and more creatinine. Now, if they're really out of range, okay, that indicates some kidney damage. But in my case, both times creatinine slowly went down with 4 to 5%. Because my glomerular filtration rate is still around 100% on a 24-hour urine check, and my cystatin C levels are always in range. They've never been out of range, but I only check those once a year because it's it's a test that costs a significant amount of money, and it takes about 2 weeks to get back because they have to send it to another lab. So I don't check my cystatin C levels that often. My creatinine levels I always check, always a little bit on the high side. Then again, my muscle mass is always a little bit on the high side. And over the course of 2 weeks, it didn't really go down that much. So creatinine levels also didn't go down that much. The most notable thing I saw in my creatine phosphate kinase levels. So the first round of fasting, they reduced with 46.5%. 46.5% while not training, but using fat burners like clenbuterol and yohimbine, which increase heart rate. In the second week, they decreased with 35.6%, So that's a less reduction, even though I used a beta blocker and didn't use clenbuterol or yohimbine or most of the fat burners. But I did exercise. So by exercising, your CPK goes down less compared to not exercising with the use of fat burners that work on the heart. So that's something interesting. I usually notice a reduction of about 40% on CPK levels. But again, if you stay active, I always deload while fasting, so you'll see a higher reduction in CPK levels compared to when you fast, when you work out. So if you want to drop your CPK levels fast, you'll have to stop training and allow for the most amount of detoxification through your kidneys, by keeping your sodium and water intake reasonably high. Blood urea nitrogen, first round, it went down from with 43.6%. I was almost at the top of the range, but still within range, so that indicates there's not too much protein metabolism and gluconeogenesis. BUN was still in range, even though I was eating about 350 grams of protein per day, so that's not too high. Not too much stress on the blood urea nitrogen or the uric acid. It went down with almost 44% by not eating protein, but I didn't check it the second time because I always see a reduction of around 40 to 45% of blood urea nitrogen. And I didn't expect any changes in that ratio on the second week of fasting because I still wasn't eating any protein. Now we come to the cholesterol. Total cholesterol reduced with 8.4% in the first week and 9.2% in the second week. That's because of all the detoxification of the bile acids using psyllium husk, sodium, and water just to excrete all the cholesterol. And of course, when you're not training, not eating any dietary cholesterol, and not taking any oral steroids or changing your steroid intake, there's no changes in cholesterol absorption or cholesterol production. So cholesterol production was steady. Cholesterol intake through dietary measures went down. And of course, the excretion of cholesterol went up by, the excretion of bile acids into the intestinal tract, which was full with psyllium husk to take it away. HDL stayed the same, and I'm going to notice my point here because I'm pretty proud of my HDL levels. On cycle, my HDL is 55. And it went down from 55 to 54 to 53 by fasting. So it only went down with 1 point per fast, which is not very significant. But hey, considering that I'm on hormones, my HDL 55, I'm pretty happy with that. So I contribute that to fish oil, cardio, citrus bergamot, eating healthy, staying away from harsh androgenic compounds like winstrol or trenbolone or halotestin or cipetrol, that kind of stuff. Test Primo, healthy lifestyle, HDL 55. I'm pretty happy with that. LDL reduced with 9.3%. Reduced with 5% the first round and 9.3% the second round. So then it ended up below 100 milligrams per deciliter, which is an LDL in range on cycle. Rare, but not impossible. I guess you'll have to fast to get it that low. C-reactive protein was already low, but it reduced with 17% in the first round, and I didn't check it again the second time because it was 0.5 milligrams per milliliter. It's, that's sufficiently low for me, not warrants another test. My liver enzymes were a little bit elevated the first round of fasting, which could be from using Accutane, which I already discontinued. That's why I have 1 or 2 pimples here and there. So the first round, the liver enzymes, both of them went down. Well, AST went down with 43% and ALT went down with 29.3%. So let's say 30 to 40% on the liver enzymes. And then the second round, they went down with about 30%. So 30 to 40% the first round and 30% the second round, which again, liver enzymes get detoxified into the bile acid and psyllium husk helps with that. I still wish them were a little bit lower. But hey, sometimes it takes a little while for liver enzymes to come down. So I did order Tutka, which I will run this entire off season. And hopefully that will keep the liver enzymes, a little bit lower than I want them to be. Again, these are not numbers that I'm worried about. My gamma GT was 11 units per liter. So that's even below the reference range of 15 units per liter. My gamma GT is always low. None of my other liver enzymes are ever high or elevated or out of range. It's only the liver enzymes that sometimes creep up a little bit. And it's because the liver enzymes, or these aminotransferases, are also found in muscle cells. And when you train for hypertrophy, some of these aminotransferases exit the muscle cell, enter the bloodstream, and then when you go for a liver enzyme check, your liver enzymes are elevated, but you train hard, so you find these liver enzymes in the muscle cell as well. So it's just common. If you really want to see where your liver enzymes are at, you need to stop training for a week because it's still elevated for about 5 days after training. You got to remember, when you train every day for hypertrophy, these liver enzymes will compound. So you stop training for a week or even 2 weeks, they should get back into range. And that was the case with mine, except for AST, which was still a little bit over where I would like them to be. Again, that's why I'm going to run TUDCA, just to bring them down a little bit, because I'm not doing anything else besides training and Accutane, which I already discontinued. That should increase my liver enzymes. So it is what it is. I'm going to keep track of that because I do want to see my liver enzymes, sufficiently low. Now, I think that concludes it pretty much for the blood work that I've done this round. I used to do serum electrolytes, so you check your magnesium, calcium, sodium, potassium, chloride, and CO2. And those numbers never really changed. So I stopped testing those because, again, before and after, it all contributes to more expenses. And after you don't really see significant changes on several fasting before and after blood works, it's kind of pointless to do it. So I usually see the most reduction in CPK because they, increase over time with this, intense hypertrophy style workouts. So at one point they start to creep up. When it's time to deload, they're usually around 4,000, 5,000. Then it's time to deload and you drop them with 40%, maybe even 50%, by deloading and fasting. And then if you want to take another week off of training, you start eating again, normally get your metabolic rate in production, that will drop with another 40 to 50%. Now, there's always a downside with training that your CPK levels are always going to be elevated, especially when you train, with high intensity, with hypertrophy in mind, following a progressive overload routine, is that your CPK is always going to be elevated. Now, a lot of bodybuilders, they don't check their levels. They go by creatinine or liver enzymes or whatever. But it's definitely important to keep track of your CPK levels because, as they climb up, you're putting more and more pressure on the kidneys. And, like rhabdomyolysis, for example, that happens when there's an abnormal amount of muscle breakdown. That's called rhabdomyolysis, which results in a CPK level of 20,000, 50,000, 100,000, 120,000 units per liter. And I've seen that on blood work. Was never on a bodybuilder, was always on like a CrossFit guy. They do the CrossFit games, or they prepare for CrossFit, and they're training all day, every day, hours and hours and hours on end. And then they get so much muscle breakdown that their CPK levels go over 25,000 units per liter. I know one guy in the fitness industry here who had 120,000 units per liter on the CPK, and he was hospitalized. So when you see your CPK at 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 units per liter, it's not really alarming. It just indicates that you're training hard. When you see 20,000 or above, yeah, that's a little bit high. You definitely don't want to reach that state, because that's when actual muscle loss starts to occur through rhabdomyolysis, which oversaturates your kidneys and leads to all kinds of other problems. So, don't train that hard, but train enough for hypertrophy and muscle growth, something you can recover from. Liver enzymes, again, same story. They're always going to be a little slightly elevated when you're a bodybuilder. You can bring them down as fast as you can with fasting and a decent, fiber protocol, because it all gets detoxified into the bile acid. If you want to speed up that excretion of the bile acids, you can look into a supplement like TUDCA, for example. I didn't use it both times, but I already ordered it, so I will add that into the next fast and throughout my off season, just to keep the liver enzymes down and increase the detoxification of the bile acids into the intestinal tract. I get plenty of chia seeds and psyllium husk every day, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. And that pretty much sums it up. So you guys can let me know if you feel that I lost muscle, if you feel that I lost any size, based on these before, during, and after pictures. I hope some of you get inspired to do fasting longer than 2 days. And no, intermittent fasting is not real fasting. If you want to do fasting, you need 2 bedroom trips in between. And a power nap in the afternoon is not a full bedroom trip. So if you want to fast a full day of no eating, but make sure your micronutrient intake and your water intake and your electrolyte intake stays consistent to what you've been doing before through supplementation. 1 full day and take it day by day. So if you start fasting Sunday evening, you go to bed, you get 8 hours for free in because you're sleeping. That's not really fasting. Fasting starts Monday morning after you've been to the bathroom and there's nothing left in your intestinal tract to be absorbed, whether that's water or a little bit of remainder of the calories or some bile acid, that still gets absorbed in the intestinal tract. Once you've evacuated everything that you ate on Sunday, your fast starts. And then you can use psyllium husk to continue and clean out your intestinal tract and make sure all the bile acid gets detoxified. You take it day by day, day by day, day by day, until you want to break your fast. And if you break your fast, do it with ketogenic food, food intake. So I wouldn't recommend even egg whites. And not because all the food and the intestinal mass and then, the waste products are all gone. You basically got a super clean intestinal tract. When you eat eggs, it would just go in, digest, increase blood sugar levels through gluconeogenesis, and then make you crash because your insulin sensitivity is so high, causing you to go hypo. You eat eggs, you eat your breakfast omelet, and you go hypo. That's how insulin sensitive you are, and that's how optimized your digestion is, because there's nothing holding it back anymore. So I would recommend something like a salmon and vegetables. Yeah, that's usually how I break my fast. Salmon takes a while to digest. It's got some omega-3s to slow the digestion, and of course, combining that with vegetables with a decent amount of fiber and cellulose, which will also slow digestion and gastric emptying. That will keep your blood sugars reasonably stable. Now, you do that the first day, and then the second day you can start adding carbohydrates back in just to reglycogenate your liver and your muscle cells. And with all this good insulin sensitivity that you've built up, you shouldn't require that much carbohydrate just to fill out. So I'm pretty full out right now. Let me give you a front double bicep, and you let me know how much muscle I lost with 12 days of fasting. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you learned something, let me know in the comment fields. And I'll see you in the next video.